Before we kick this review off, I would just like to apologise for the complete lack of podcasts last week. I was really tired and had heaps of homework on the day of recording. On top of that, Pete was unavailable, so we just thought it would be best to do a catch-up episode next week instead. Welcome back to MCReviews Monstercat 003 Momentum episode 10. Today we're going to be looking at Arion's second dubstep track on the label, Elements of Sanity. So far I've been quite enjoying Arion's music. Excluding his obnoxiously infuriating vocal chops, he's been making some pretty damn cool stuff, and some of the more, modern sounding songs that don't necessarily sound like they were obviously made in 2011. By far his biggest flaw as an artist is his use of vocal chops. They are just so stupid and annoying. Blow Explode is the obvious and biggest example of this, but he's done it in some of his other tracks, and it can sometimes just ruin the entire song. So let's see if this is the case with Elements of Sanity, and get right into the analysis. So the track starts off with a very cool intro. It's highly dramatic and in a nice surprise actually very glitchy. To start off with, the main melody sounds pretty much like a grand piano on a pretty decent chord progression, but constantly stuttering and glitching out in a really cool way. After about 20 seconds you start to hear a few new elements get introduced. One is a really cool little twang kind of sound which reminds me a lot of Mr. Fiji Ouija. The second element is that the piano chords stop glitching and fall into the background, and in its place a new really fast and awesome glitchy synth is added, and a dubstep beat is also introduced. And it's one of those rare good dubstep beats, one of the ones that actually has a step in it, and it sounds really good here. As the build-up starts, the beat is removed, and some of those very dramatic orchestral choir type vocals that you would associate with someone like Arion come in and add an interesting flair to the track. The song continues forwards by slowly raising some of the frequencies of all the melodic elements of the track to make them sound clearer and clearer as it builds, alongside a muffled, slow bass kick which also raises in frequency as the track builds up. There's a drum break and then it drops, and before we get into the drop I just want to mention how awesome this intro was. It had variation, it had multiple interesting and layered elements, it had a great beat, multiple melodies, and constantly added new elements. This build up was also great as it wasn't overstated and it had a lot more subtlety than most tracks of this era. It was much slower and didn't feature the generic white noise build up or escalating speed, which is really nice to hear in a track this early on. But then it drops and we kinda get to the main problem of this track, in a very similar way to Formless, which I reviewed a few episodes ago. While not quite as bad as Formless, the mixing of this drop really isn't very good at all, and it sounds quite muddy and amateur, which is a massive pity because all the individual elements are awesome. It keeps the fast glitchy melody from the intro and makes it what I guess you could call the main lead of the drop. There is for the most part a genuinely amazing beat. It is a combination of a few different things, one being the awesome dubstep beat from earlier, the one that had a step in it, two being some almost trap-like fast backing hats that add some really awesome pace to the drop, and three being a lot of loud cymbals and crashes. This beat is really, for the most part, amazing and is constantly doing little glitchy fast drum rolls. It is easily one of, if not the best beat I've talked about so far in the series, and there are also a couple small backing white noise fade outs and minor melodies which are thrown in and out of the drop. So all these elements so far sound great, and they are great individually, but when they're put together in the way that Arion did, it sounds really bad. The melodies are too quiet and blurry, and the white noise, cymbals, and crashes are far too loud and completely fill the drop with unnecessary noise, which just clutters and confuses the drop. Because the main melodies are so quiet, they sound like background melodies, but there's nothing in the foreground to fill in for them, leading for the song to sound just quite empty. This drop has a really easy fix. Majorly lower the volume of any white noise, cymbals, and crashes, and then majorly increase the volume of the main lead and change the frequencies around to make it a sharper sound. I've used FL Studio before, and that really isn't a particularly hard thing to do, but as it stands now, the main part of this drop is just muddy and unclear. But as the drop goes along, the main melody is suddenly stripped from the track and replaced with a highly prominent and highly dramatic strings melody. This addition is really cool, and it's loud and clear clear enough to actually sound like it's at the front of the song, unlike the earlier melodies. But the beat is slowed down and the trap-like elements are completely removed, making this second half of the drop a whole lot more boring than the first half. Suddenly the main lead is reintroduced, and as always it's a really awesome melody. It's glitchy, it's unpredictable, and it has a nice splash of 2012 melodic dubstep nostalgia, but it is again mixed into the song terribly, making it just blur into the background with all the other elements. And god, I want to love this drop so much. I can hear a genuinely amazing song here, but it's being held back by bad production. If this drop was done right, it could have sounded so good. It reminds me of a lot of Tut Tut Child melodic dubstep tracks, which is an amazing thing to be reminded of, and if this drop was properly executed, it would easily be up to that standard, but the drop is just too muddy and unclear as it stands now. The song goes into a very basic midsection, which pretty much just consists of 3 elements, one being the main melody, which has been in most of the song so far. It's that glitchy awesome one that's been really badly mixed into the song. 2 being the piano from the intro, just this time with no glitchiness, making it sound kinda basic and almost amateur in sound. And 3 being the slower, less interesting dubstep beat from the second half of the drop. The second build-up is very similar to the first, just raising the pitch of the main lead subtly until it drops, which is, again, good. But then it drops and we get to easily the worst part of the track, the second drop. And this drop it's very basic and pretty much only consists of 3 elements. The decent beat, which I mentioned from the midsection, the very amateur and basic sounding piano chords are in the background, and by far the biggest part of this drop is what I like to call baby's first wub dub. Or at least that's what it sounds like. It's just the most generic and basic and amateur kind of dubstep. It's just the wub wub sound that everyone knows. It's not a sound I associate with Monstercat, as this is the first of any track so far I've heard that it's in. And it's just a really basic sound. It's the kind of thing that Fox News makes news reports on and makes old people say, oh, electronic music isn't real music, it's just farts. And while at times this sound is kinda cool and fast, it's just so generic and just so out of place in this song, and I really don't like it at all here. There isn't much else to say about the drop. It's kinda short and it's just a generic wub dub thing. It's unoriginal, it's boring, and it's pretty bad. It wasn't too muddy, which was good, but that doesn't make up for it just being bad in my opinion. I feel like he was going for an emotional and climactic drop, but it just doesn't work at all here. It goes out of the drop into what I guess you could call the second midsection, but it is debatable as to whether there is a third drop. It starts off with that very simple piano that we've been hearing throughout the song, and an almost trance-like pulsating sound which builds in volume until suddenly there is a drum roll and the third drop just kinda happens. This is, I guess, the most chill drop in the song. As a result, it is probably the least cluttered. It's pretty much just that not quite as good beat, that trance-like pulsating sound, that piano backing, and some little white noise-ish backing basses that have been put in and out of both the first and third drops. This drop is fine. It's a bit muddy, but nowhere near as bad as the first drop, and in that respect, it's just kinda harmless as a whole. The drop doesn't last very long, as it quickly drops out and goes into an ending segment. The track wraps up with that fast trap-like beat in the background, the little white noise-ish basses, and the main lead of the track all fading out with some cool choir type vocals. Wow, that was a lot to get through. Hopefully you could follow most of what I was saying there, because it was a quite long and in-depth review. There was just a lot that I wanted to say on it. So yeah, this song is kind of a pity to talk about for me, because I really do want to like it. I hear some really cool and genuinely awesome things in it, but they just don't work with the rest of the song at all, which just kind of ruins them. That's what I liked about the song. The intro was awesome and was probably the best part of the track. The build-ups were quite well done, and I really liked the main melody of the track. And I thought that when it was at its most complex in the first drop, the beat was genuinely amazing. As for what I don't like though, the biggest and most obvious thing was the mixing. The overuse of white noisy sounds or drums like crashes and cymbals which linger in combination with the main melodies often being too quiet and not sharp enough makes the entire first drop and most of the third drop blurry and hard to listen to. Many of the melodies were pretty overused in the track as well, especially that main piano. Damn, by the end of that song I was really sick of it. And the second drop, in all honesty, was just bad. With everything considered, I just don't think that this song is particularly good. What it is it's a great song trapped in a bad song's body. I keep hearing it trying to break through and be great, but it just never quite gets there, and for that reason I'm going to be giving Elements of Sanity by Arion a 4 out of 10. It pains me to say that this song can't be any better, but as it stands, it's just not very good. The thing that confuses me most about this track is that Arion, obviously at the time of making the track, did have skill, and he did know how to make sounds pop in a song and how to make sounds work. He did know how to mix well. Just go listen to the drops of Blow Explode. So it seems almost that he chose to make this song sound the way it does. Either that, or he just was really unfamiliar with this more melodic style of dubstep. Okay, well thanks heaps for sitting all the way through this massive review. Let me know if you had the same issues with the track as I did. At this point, I have no clue when Pete will be uploading his next review. Hopefully tomorrow you'll see his review of The Journey by Resonate, but judging by his recent track record, no guarantees on that front. The day after that, you'll be expecting my review of Monstercat 003's last track, Cloak and Dagger by Arion. But until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.